Alright, some building tips. Now when you get bigger things going, it's often time to switch over to world space. In fact, world space is the preferred state of nature. It actually moves around a little bit better with objects, so think about world space. That's building tip number 1. Building tip number 2. This is a group, and there's a difference between a group and a single object, obviously, but there is some downfalls to having groups. So here is a single object. One of the main things that I like to do is move the pivot sometimes. So in this case, maybe I want to put this pivot over here, so when I scale it, it scales it up from the corner. Alright, well, I could go over here, right click, pivot, move here, snapped. And it'll snap it to this little corner. And then I could actually scale it up. See? Good. But the minute I click anywhere else, it moves it back. Well, if you want it to always be there, you have to know that if you go pivot, move here, snapped, there's also a right click, pivot, save pivot as pre-pivot. Alright, so now anytime you click on that object, the pivot's always there in the corner, with the exception of groups. Now, a group, let's say I have this group, and I do the very same thing. I right click, go pivot, move here, snapped. I can make this grow. Oops. Gotta be careful what I click on here. I can make the wall grow up and down. But the minute I go right clicking on it and go pivot, save pivot as pre-pivot, it goes back to the center. So groups cannot be pre-pivoted after the fact. Alright, there's also one more thing that you should know. There's a group and there's a prefab. So right click, create prefab. I'm going to put an underscore here in my name. Then I'll put something like wall 1. Okay, now this is a prefab. Different story. If you look, the pivot point is now moved to the corner, but you get this P in here. Alright, also, if you look at, I think it's, I'm just going to search Jason here. And then go for all. I now have a pre-pivot, which is weird because it gives me a thumbnail of this giant, huge world. We'll go into that later, but other than that, now I can click and drag these out, and they're always there. Now, pre-pivots are nice, but they take up a lot of space in a package, okay? So you wouldn't want to build an entire world out of these like packaged things. What's nice about them, I think, unless they change something behind my back, is that you can change the pivot on them. So let's try that. Let's go here, pivot, move here, then right click, pivot, save pivot as pre-pivot, and sure enough, that's my new pivot point. So if you find disgust in using groups because you can't move the pivot, which is weird, you can always use one of these, a prefab, and then move the pivot. Alright, there we go. So that is pivots, prefabs, groups. Oh, one more thing. Let's say I have a group, because I don't want to make another video on this topic. If I have a group, I just want it to be said that, let's say I need it not to be a group. I can right click on it, go to groups, and then go to ungroups. Now there are all separate meshes. All their pivots are screwed up, so you have to make sure all the pivots get put back into place. Some make sense, some do not. Alright, so that about covers all the things that are related to static meshes and moving them around and grouping them and ungrouping them. So let's go on to the next video.